book study. It is facilitated by 3 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not your conventional AA meeting. We will not be asking you to share. We will not be asking you, we will be asking you some questions where you can throw up in the chat. But other than that, we'll be going through step 6 and 7 tonight. And we're going to be putting up some links. Adam and myself and Tony will throw up some links for the worksheets that we usually go through on this. How we open up this meeting is with the set-aside prayer.
I'm here, by the way.
Hey, Kim. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my disease, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. Tony.
Recovered alcoholic, my name's Tony. Good to see everybody tonight. Friday, date's April 8, 1989. Tonight I would ask especially pay attention to that set-aside prayer and keep an open mind. We're going to probably look at this in a whole new way that most of you have probably never been shown or kind of directed through the book, actually what it's saying, right? A lot of I think steps 6 and 7 is probably some of the most confusing steps in our literature, and it's only a couple paragraphs. It's so simple, it's mind-boggling, eh? So when if we do a bit of a review and we start going through this, right? So the main purpose in the beginning is to get educated on what the problem is from whose point of view, from their point of view, right? And also what the solution is from whose point of view, from their point of view, right? And also the course of action based on their experience. So my job in this thing is to get educated on what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action from whose perspective, from their perspective, right? Do I get to formulate my opinion on what I think they're talking about?
No.
Right? So the whole idea is, in order to become a part of the collective, I need to understand what they're talking about. So if you had the first 100 men and women and they would go to a meeting and they were sharing, would they all sound the same or would they all sound different? Would it all be, for me, recovery? Well, for me, my understanding, my interpretation, or would it be a collective approach and understanding to this thing? It'd be collective, right? And that's what they talk about. So if you're an alcoholic, that means you have these certain characteristics, certain symptoms. And if you need this solution, you need to understand what it is, the solution that they're offering, and the course of action to bring that about. So as we go through this, we find out what our real dilemma is. We find out about the malady, what condemns us to keep drinking, this phenomena that centers in our mind, right? The main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body, right? So something happens in our thinking and it gives us the idea that it's okay to take a drink. Anybody ever have that problem here? Suddenly, right? And they gave a couple examples to what they meant by that, Jim and Fred and stuff like that. And they went on to say that the only thing that seems to, starting from the doctor's opinion, that the only thing that seems to save these people from themselves with these characteristics is an entire psychic change, right? And it has to be formulated in something of depth and weight, something that's grounded in something other than themselves. So as we went to We Agnostics, they kind of talked about, well, backing up on page 23, what did they say our first obsession was? What's our first obsession, right? Fixing ourselves. How many people have been obsessed with fixing themselves here? I'm working on me. I'm doing this. Look, I'm me recovery, right? Pain-based recovery. Right? Right? How many people find it a great exercise to work on themselves all day? I mean, it's painful. Something about the idea of over-fixating or over-concentrating on self causes a lot of anxiety, fear, and impending calamity and doom. Anybody ever have those characteristics? Yet we do it again. We try to keep working on it, and then we become fear-based, right? So as they go through this, so they say that's the first idea that needs to be smashed, is that I could be my own solution. And that's what they talk about in the 3 pertinent ideas and how it works. And then when we get to We Agnostics, they talk about what our real dilemma is, what our real problem is, and it makes sense why I haven't been able to change me through my efforts and all the meetings, all the therapy, all the psychiatry. All these things are good things, but my approach to fixing me, why it hasn't been able to work, even though I had a belief system in God and I've had a relationship with God, why it didn't seem to fix the problem that I seemed to kind of condemn me to keep on drinking again. And so what did they say our major problem was? They talked about lack of power and we agnostics, right? And how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about, right? For some of us or all of us.
All of us.
So that means it's collective now, right? We're all doing the same thing. If we all have the same problem and we all need the same solution, that means when we're talking about this stuff in step 1 and 2, would we all sound the same?
100%.
100. So when they talked about the course of action necessary to bring this about, where and how am I to find this power that creates this change, this psychic change or spiritual experience that they talk about, sufficient enough for me to recover, where I no longer have an alcoholic mind? Where do I find this power that I need to get access to?
Deep down within.
And that's exactly what this book is about. So what's my whole involvement in this then?
Nothing much.
Well, there's a key ingredient that I need to be willing to go through this thing and be willing to continuously being challenged to change my point of view. How many people found a lot of this stuff really challenging? Because we think we're waiting for the idea that says, well, when does it ask me my opinion on this stuff? You notice it hasn't asked you your opinion yet? Have anybody noticed that? They haven't asked you, oh, by the way, what do you think? Right?
And if you can find it, you can put it up in the chat.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat, right? Because they already know what you think. Okay, so deep down within. So when they talk about here in We Agnostics, the biggest challenge I'm going to have and always have is being willing to change my point of view, right? To apply certain spiritual principles to my life, right? And I think that was one of the most amazing things I ever read in We Agnostics, right? Right? They talked about that on page 52. And it will continue for the rest of your life. Well, to change your point of view means you have 2 points of view. Most of us only had our point of view. How many people have been like that here? You only have one point of view, your own, right? And you're looking for people to agree with whose point of view? Your point of view. If you get someone that doesn't agree with your point of view and they're talking, are you listening or thinking on a rebuttal?
A rebuttal. In the conversation.
So we're thinking about a rebuttal. Or if we don't like what one person says, how many people try to find another person to agree with them? We go find 4 people until we find 3 people to agree with us, right?
I'm sure there's some people in this room with at least 3 sponsors. Okay?
Yeah, including you, Joe. No, just let's not even go there. So they talk about that here on page 52 is the human dilemma. Did you want to kind of read that, Kim? Good to see you, Kim. How you doing?
I'm good, just zooming in from Philly.
Oh, good.
There you are.
Time travel.
Yeah, Zoom travel. It's great. 52?
Yeah. So
we had to ask ourselves?
Yep.
Yeah, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view.
So they're saying there we need to have that characteristic or that element in our sobriety from here on out. When we're having problems, it's something that we created, and we need to be able to pause, be able to assess, and redirect or back out from the area we're in, emotionally, mentally, and the attachment we have, to back out from it, to kind of have not be married to the story and get a new story and move in a new direction. But I didn't have that element at this point in time. But we're looking at 6 and 7. You'll see how this ties in now. Go ahead.
We were having trouble with personal relationships.
Nobody in this group, eh?
We couldn't control our emotional natures.
We think most of the time we can. That's all that counts, right? Most of the time. But when you lose it, do you lose it kind of like a little bit, or you lose it? I mean, even a cat hides. The neighbor's cat. I mean, when you lose it, how many people has lost it here?
Oh, yeah.
Like, nothing much going on. You just become so crazy within inside of yourself. You just start kicking shoes, slamming door. Anybody been that crazy here? Just the energy. You ever notice how your energy, like, you just kind of like a pressure cooker. Like, you just snap. How many people here? And like you start getting like a subtle form of Tourette's, and you start losing it. You're losing it. People who are witnessing it going, whoa, whoa. And then after you witness you and go, whoa, whoa. How many? So you see that energy happens that we create by our inability to be able to function within our own self based on instincts, right? Go ahead.
We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people.
So what did they say the basis of this was the fear, right? We're full of fear, and that's creating all these things, but I can't see it because I'm narrating the story within my own mind. I'm looking to myself for an answer what's happening around here, and I'm talking to myself. Anybody have that narrator in their mind says, hey, I'll tell you what's going on here. I'll tell you this. And then it starts talking to you. Yeah, that's what's going on. Yeah, and those guys and that people and this. Yeah. Anybody have that narrator? The more you listen to it, the worse things get. Anybody? Huh? And then when you're done with everybody, you start on you? Anybody? So it's interesting, and it's that perpetual circle. It's that hamster wheel. Anybody ever hear the story about the hamster wheel? It's going 100 miles an hour, but the hamster's got rigor mortis. It's been dead for days, but the thing's just spinning like, wow. Anyhow, so when we start going through this, and then we get to page 60, they talk about here, they're going to tell us what they mean by step 3 and how to do step 3 and being at step 3. They kind of talk about, they're going to get us ready for this idea here. And this kind of saying, so again, I don't have to do anything but being willing to participate in what they're saying and follow what's kind of being led. So if we look at the 3 pertinent ideas, which will make more sense now that I've done the 4th step. Right now that I've done the 4th step and I'm engaged in the 5th step, or I've done my 5th step, this makes way more sense, especially applying the prayers, right? And one of the things that I don't know if we mentioned it last week, one of the greatest assets you have in your 5th step for finding somebody who's appropriate to help you guide you through it is actually prayer, right? Praying for the right person or place to show up to give you guidance to it. So if we kind of look at page 60, and they talk about our description of the alcoholic.
Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas.
Clear. It's clear now, right? There's no fuzziness to it. Like it's clear, right?
A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives.
A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own thinking. Same thing, because our lives are derivative of our thinking. Right? Same thing. Is it not?
100%.
Okay, B.
That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism.
Probably, right? They give credit still to psychiatry and doctors and all these other people. We get some relief, but not the necessary relief some of us need in order to be free from ourselves, right? So alcohol is but a symptom. So the symptoms related to our thinking and our instincts in life. We just read that on page 52, this kind of summary. If my thinking's all whacked, and the more I work on my thinking, the worse matters get. Anybody ever notice that? If your thinking's not right, how are you able to fix something that you created?
Nothing. Can't.
So self is you're being driven by self, and after you're analyzing it. You're not analyzing the car wreck before it happens. You're analyzing it after it happens. You're already in these emotional mental states when you start looking at it, right? It's not, you've not curbed it, you're in it. That's what they're saying. Could relieve my alcohol, relieve the symptoms created by self, right? And what was that big C?
That God could and would if he were sought.
So, we know what that means now, right? We have a spiritual solution to the human dilemma. And when we went through the fourth, we seen that when we apply these things, we actually get relief through meditation and prayer. Where did we learn how to meditate in prayer and create a different reality within inside of ourselves, or create a different narrator within our thinking and our being? Where did we learn how to do that?
Step 4.
Right? So then they talk about here being convinced.
Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him.
So our will and our life is what? Our thinking and our actions, right? I don't know what exactly they are now. All I know is they've caused me a lot of problems at this stage of the game. Now I'm really clear what they are because I've already gone through 4 and 5, right? And I'm ready to look at 6 and 7. I'm very clear now, these things that caused me my problems and how my life looking the way it looked. Right? How else could my life look driven by these things, or being perpetuated or being narrated by these internal mechanisms within inside of myself? Now it's clear, right?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success.
So when we started this on this page, I didn't know what they were talking about. But now that I finished my 4 and I finished my 5, it's very clear what they're talking about. Everybody able to see that clarity now that they've done their 4 and 5? I didn't have this clarity beforehand, but now I have it. And it's kind of wow. You know what I mean? But these things aren't eating my lunch anymore. Not mostly, but starting to have freedom from it, right?
On that basis, we were almost always in collision with something or somebody.
True or false?
Even though our motives are good.
It's true.
True or false, right? So that's why it's tricky, right? Because if you're driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion, you think your motives are good, but really they're not good, but you are unable to see it. That's why they talk about in the 5th step, being in counsel or self-appraisal really isn't sufficient enough. Now we see why, right? Because if you're driven, what they talk about here on page 62, by selfishness and self-centeredness, you want to hit us up with that?
62?
Yep. And we've covered all this in great detail. We're just doing a highlight to bring us up to where we are in 6 and 7. It'll make more sense going over this the way we are than it would just going into 6 and 7. Because a lot of us, we've been taught something that's about 6 and 7 that isn't 6 and 7. Right? And so we need to do the kind of the building blocks that lead us up into what exactly they mean by 6 and 7. Okay?
Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity.
So driven by 100 forms of what?
Fear, self-delusion.
So the basis of it is fear. The symptoms that create that come out of that fear is that self-delusion, right? Isn't it? Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. So the underlying drive is the fear, the instinct-based fear. And we see based on our inventory now where that fear comes from. Is a threat to one of my basic instincts where I couldn't see that before. Now I'm able to see where it derives from, which is pretty interesting. How many people were able to get that clarity from doing their 4? So now I see these things that are eating my lunch and driving me, right? Okay?
We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, But we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt.
So what creates self? What's creating self? What are we making decisions on based on self? So in the resentment, we see it's the third column. Based on my instincts, I'm making decisions to try to get security in one of these areas or try to make me feel better in one of these areas. I'm making decisions based on my self-esteem, personal relationships, material, emotional, acceptable sex, hidden sex, social, security, or sexual. I see it's one of these areas that are the root of the cause that's driving me. Pretty cool, right? How many people found that pretty interesting? So now I see why it caused me all these problems. And based on these instincts being out of whack, I reacted selfish, inconsiderate, dishonest, and inconsiderate, and self-seeking, and I involved these people. Right? So if I was spiritually right, or if I was right in these areas, would I have responded in selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? So we see that these are like the warning lights. These are really not the problem. These are the indicators that come on your car that there's an underlying problem. But we got taught these are the problems, right? The selfish, the dishonesty, the self-seeking, right? And then consideration. So right away we think if that's the problem, then I'm going to go work on those things. But those things are symptoms of the problem. So if you're driven by 100 forms of fear or self-delusion, you're working on the wrong thing. Anybody ever have a toothache here? And you bite on a Tylenol to get rid of the pain in the tooth. We think the symptom's gone away. That means the tooth is okay now.
I don't know about Tylenol. Something maybe a little harder there, Tone.
Well, I've been sober a little while, buddy. Okay, so... Good to see you, Joe. Always a pleasure, buddy. So we see what's causing our problem. We step on the toes of our fellows. They retaliate because we're threatening one of their instincts now. When they retaliate, even though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us. So we see on page 67 that a lot of these people is because I set the ball rolling, because I try to get something, or steal something, or get security from them, or more than was rightly deserved to me, or more dependence on them that caused them to retaliate. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. But you have to do the fourth to see that, so it's really interesting, right? So go ahead.
Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done."
So we see that this energy thing is happening. You're containing it within inside of yourself before it starts to develop. You're changing the story. You're changing the narration of what's happening inside of you, right? So when we back up, we kind of went forward there real fast, but when we back up to page 63, they talk about here that there's an idea in the prayer of a relationship that could be possible for me and take care of all these things that are driving me, that I could have a different experience in my life based on the access of this relationship with a power greater than myself. Step 3 is an idea, right? That when I look at it, the possibility of obtaining it is the result of going through the rest of the course of action. Because if I could obtain these ideas in step 3, I wouldn't need to do the rest of the work. Right? If I could have this relationship in step 3, the way a lot of people talk about, then I wouldn't have, where would I get the insights necessary to apply spiritual principles where they talk about change? I don't have it. It'd be another form of self-delusion, thinking I have this relationship in step 3, so no further relationships necessary. All I need to do is step 3 every day. Well, it's kind of like that's not the design of it. The design of it is a summary here in the prayer that I could experience these things if I go through the rest of the course of the action. So on page 64, they talked about what's in the way of this relationship, this experience that I need to have in order for me to recreate my life, right? To remove this problem of alcoholism in my life so I could deal with the human dilemma by applying these principles to it. So they talk about here, we had to find out the things in ourselves that have been blocking us. See what they say. So what's the purpose of the fourth step? Is to get down to cause and conditions of the things that have been blocking me. From what? From this energy. It already exists. Where does it exist? It exists deep down within me. We already established that, right? We've done that. We've always had that inner voice or that thing that's always wanted better for us or talk to us or create. We already know that, right? And if you've gone through your 4 and 5, you got a good understanding of this thing now. So when we go through it, what was the number one common manifestation or number one block that blocks us off from this source?
Resentment.
So keep that in mind. Resentment is the number one thing. And so when they get to page 66, they talk about here, and if you want to hit us up with this, it's very interesting in the wording here, and it'll make more sense in the 6 and 7. Page 66, it is plain.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
Deep. We know what anybody ever have deep resentments here? Deep, runs deep.
So, would you, explain that to the group as something that you would felt now, but it happened 20 years ago?
Something that has the ability to kind of change your whole energy, change your whole demeanor. When it comes to the surface, it's deep within, like it's rooted.
Yeah.
Like deep rooted, like it isn't going anywhere. Like that's where they talk root and branch. They talk below the surface, and it holds the structure of the tree in place, right? So it talks deep resentment. So when we went through the fourth, a lot of us realized, man, we got some deep stuff going on. There's the surface stuff, but there's some real deep stuff. Anybody? How many people got some real deep stuff? Right? And we only see it every once in a while because we've been able to navigate or keep it in its place or keep it pushed down inside, but it's still eating our lunch and still determining the outcome of our existence because it's still making decisions for us at a subconscious level. It's like your computer, at certain thing you put something in the browser. What happened, Joe?
No, nothing.
Oh, you put something in the browser and all this information comes up. And that's like when you go through life, use your thinking, your sight, your hearing and all that. And at a subconscious level, all this stuff comes to the surface to learn to react or respond into something that's happening now. A misinterpretation of what life is happening now based on yesterday events. Anybody have that problem? They call it triggers, right? They call it triggers or this. Is yesterday's lunch still interfering with today's breakfast, right? So, go ahead.
There's a question in the chat, Tony. The difference between resentment and re-feeling the emotions.
Resentment's the same thing.
Yeah.
To re-feel and replay. There's anger that happens today. Anger is something that a guy hit my car today. Get a little angry about it. I just got a new paint job. Anger. Tomorrow when I get up and I still carry that, it's now turned into a resentment.
Yeah.
To re-feel and replay. The best terminology you ever heard? You ever watch those sporting events? Let's watch that again in slow motion. Boom. Oh, that hurts. Let's watch it again, slower. Oh, look at that leg go backwards. Let's watch that one more time, people. We've been watching some of those movies for 20, 30 years. Let's go over that again. One more time. But how we make them pay, or we're going to do this or do that, make them, right? Anybody, I should have said this. I should have did this. Blah, blah. Right? Okay. Back to the octagon. Okay, so here we go.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of his spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit.
Okay, so right there. For when harboring such feelings. What does harboring mean?
Holding on to, catering to it, nestling it.
Yeah, you ever see when the ships are in the harbor? It's anchored. It's anchored there. They're anchored. And they go with the tide. They just spin over and over and over. And anything that's in their way, collision, right? They're not going, they're anchored. In the harbor. This kind of, and some of our resentment. So we see these feelings, right? For when harboring such feelings. So that's an indication. So that's an indicator that that's a form of meditation that we're going to keep an eye on when we look at 6 and 7. So we see now, yeah, you know what? When these resentments, these things come to the surface again, how many people now realize and see how their energy changes? Right? It's like when you see a nice story, you ever notice how your energy kind of goes along nicely? And then you watch something that disturbs you and it really disturbs you, creates anxiety. There's nothing happening. And all your energy changes. You ever watch a movie and you get intense, like anxiety? There's nothing happening. But all your instincts are getting ready for fight or flight. And we have the same thing within our own thinking in the replay, at our subconscious. Something comes. You ever notice you're sitting there on a nice day and you're somewhere totally different than where you're at? You're reliving, refeeling, or you're trapped in the future, you're trapped in the past, but you're not present. How many people have been there? And you come to in the awareness of it because your energies change. So when you start overthinking or overfeeling, what's the first thing that changes is your energy and your breathing. You start becoming anxiety based. The first sign that you hear people say, I have an anxiety problem. No, you have a thinking problem.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you'd be prey to misery and depression and you wouldn't really be useful to anyone, eh?
Yeah, if you had a narrator in your head talking shit to you all day long, how do you think you would feel?
Crippled.
Like, how many people would allow somebody to sit beside you all day, talk to you the way you talk to you?
You'd have to kill it.
You have to get, but we phone it the next day. So where do we leave off? So when harboring such feelings, then they talk about here. Let's go again. So sunlight of the Spirit, right?
Yeah. So for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again.
Not the obsession, the insanity, the malady resurfaces again. Alcoholism returns. Right? If, the biggest word in the book.
If we were to live, we had to be free of anger.
Somebody harboring onto that anchor right now?
The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poisonous.
So again, poison. So now we've gone through the 4 and 5. We're looking back on it before we get 6 and 7. Remember when they say we take this book down, we go over the first 5 proposals. Is the work solid so far? And they talk about poison. When I look at some of these emotions I've harbored, I've had situations that put me right on the ground in a fetal position.
Yeah.
Fetal position. I have nights where I couldn't sleep before I've done this process. I couldn't sleep. I've caused myself ulcers, dry heaving. When I got sober, I dry heave all the time. My brain was so dominating in the bondage itself that I thought, my God, is this being sober? Like the mind is such a powerful thing left to its own devices. And the narrator knows me better than I know myself. It knows how to get my attention. It knows how to talk to me. Driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion, it can get my attention because it doesn't like to talk by itself. It needs me involved.
Participate.
Right? And so what happens as time goes on, the narrator moves farther back within inside of me. He's not sitting beside me anymore. And on the good days, I don't hear him. On the days I get a little spiritually off, he goes, can we talk now? What about now? And then I find I'm engaged in conversation, and I go, oh, what's going on here? And I go back to the process. What part of self is taken? Where's the instincts leading me astray here? And I go back to the recipe. Okay, go ahead.
We turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle.
There's that angle again. Different view, different angle. So when I'm jammed in, that's usually self saying, I don't see any other options here. I don't see other way out. I'm trapped. I've created a trap within inside of myself, and the anxiety and fear and impending calamity and doom. There's no way out of this. Then panic sets in. Anybody? And so that's why they're saying now I've gone through this. I've learned how to. Now in the fourth step, they talk about on page 68 about this fear. So we see that the purpose of the resentment process is to learn how to master resentment, right? And we'll see why that is in 6 and 7, then later on in 10 and 11, right? So here they talk about this relationship, and they talk about here, perhaps there's a better way. Let's hit it up with there. Page 68.
Got post-it notes here. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns.
So there's a recipe there they're getting us ready for that we're going to continue for the rest of our lives. So when I get jammed in with my thinking, who's now resurfaced? Who's back in charge? Me. And if I'm in charge, the indicator is I'm worried about my future. I'm worried about my past. I'm worried about all these different things. The narrator's talking to me about solving all these problems. If I'm trusting and relying on God, is I'm going to step back from that. And what can I do now? Pray and meditate. What can I do now? What is the things I need to do? But if I haven't done my 4 and 5, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm still going to be driven by all these things. I need to learn this recipe. I've done my 5 and I'm going into 6 and 7. I should be free of 90% of this stuff because I have a recipe for it now, which is pretty cool. Okay, go ahead.
Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity.
And it's not hard. What does that mean, calamity with serenity, Joe?
Can we now be at peace with the things that were crippling us?
So yeah,
we now have another view and go to Him instead of resulting to being a participant in that thought or that action or whatever it is that's dominating us and taking us away from being in the moment.
And being in an experience, we're just getting a recipe now, and that means allowing God to demonstrate what He can do. Right? So here is kind of like, yeah, I'm worried about what's happening, finances, work, all this other stuff. God, I know you got me. Like reiterating the prayer of being, what do you want me to do today? What can I do today? What do you need me to do today? And the right people, places, things will show up. And it'll become more evident when you do your 8 and 9s, especially when you do your 9s and you're living in 10, 11, how God's fingerprints are all over everything. But I don't know how to see that at this stage of the game. I'm just getting the recipe to look for His fingerprints. Look, where's God in this, right? Because usually when I have fear, anxiety, and impending calamity, where's God in this? Or where's this power? Or where's source? Or whatever you want to call it. Where am I with the connection? Am I instinct-based? Am I fear-based? Or am I God-based? Right? And that's what they're getting at here, okay?
We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do.
Yeah, so if you're in a meeting and you go to apologize for God, stop it. Don't apologize for God. No. You hear people apologize. Well, I'm going to talk. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. You know what I mean? If it wasn't for God and his power or we wouldn't be here the way we are. We wouldn't have Alcoholics Anonymous. There was an intervention on a global state here, allowing us to be free and live the life that we're living. Don't be sorry for your dependence or belief in something greater than yourself. If it disturbs people, that's for them and their sponsor, right? It's pretty miraculous, the story that we get to live today as the result of somebody carrying this message to us and that we get to have, right? Don't be sorry. Don't apologize. Right, we're examples of something great. Somebody's looking to us right now. You may not really want what you have, but there's a lineup of people that love to be where you're at, to experience where you're at. We're considering, how many people would like to be back where they were just before they came into recovery?
Got a few show of hands here.
Yeah. So where you're at is not that bad, really, when you put things in perspective, right? And that's what this is about, putting things in perspective. It's not measuring your sobriety against somebody else's. It's measuring your life against your life, right? You got a bit of hope. You got a bit of, is there progress from where you used to be to where you are now? Are you able to have a bit of relief when you choose to practice these things and trust and rely? Is there a different experience for me when I do these things? Right? And that's why the ABCs talk about being convinced, is a lot of us get mistaken getting feeling better for getting better. Anybody? A lot of us like the idea is, I'm feeling good now, I'd like to feel this way for the rest of my life.
Well, give off the impression that it's all about becoming happy, joyous, and free here.
Right? Yeah. 100%. You hear people talk about the promises. I'm getting this back. I'm getting that back. That's not the promises. The promises is, am I going to be okay whether I get these things back or not? Can I feel peace in the midst of calamity? In the midst of chaos, can I find peace? The kids, the wife, all these things are happening around me. I come in here and I got a Smith right behind me of the chaos and damage that I've caused. Can I find a bit of peace today to start chipping away at that stuff? Yeah, you know what? I can. And that's the beauty. Can I just get enough relief for today? Just this moment. And that's what it's saying here. If I'm willing and show some humility, I can get relief regardless of where I'm at. But I get, who do I want narrating my story? Do I want to be stuck to my story and listen to the narrator that's talking to me? Or do I want to pause and invite something greater than me in my life to have a new narration? Right? And that's what they're talking about here, right?
We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear.
Yeah, not later. May you find him now. It's available when? Now. If you want to be feeling better, do you want it now or later?
Now.
It's all about now.
It's like that movie, Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. When does he want it? He wants it right now.
Right now. I want it now. Oh, no, everything I've ever done is about now. Anybody? So this is kind of like the same thing. They know the audience we're dealing with, right? Well, you know what? You come back next week and you can have some then. No, I want some now.
Yeah.
Now.
How many people have Amazon Prime because they want it now? Look at all the hands going up. Yeah. 60 extra bucks, eh? Okay, no, just playing around. That's fun.
Joe? No, sir. Okay, so...
Forgive me. Pray for me. It's okay.
So they go through this process, and by the time we get to page 69, it's pretty cool because now at the bottom, they talk about here, we'll just kind of, whatever our ideas turn out to be, right?
Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. So they're not any other problem that causes me grief, where I become a prisoner within myself, where it causes me anguish, problem, and anxiety. Any other problem. We treat sex as we would any other problem. And here's the recipe that they've been giving us all along, right? What's the recipe? In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it.
Doesn't matter what it is. That's the recipe. It's the spiritual recipe. If I'm having perplexed or I'm having problems or I have creating stumbling blocks within inside of myself, I need to be able to pause. The serenity prayer is one of the most powerful prayers we can, when you kind of look at it. We get things to acceptance. No, acceptance is not the answer to our problems. Look at the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity. I need clarity to be able to see things. I need to be emotionally detached from things that I'm not driven from them. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. What's my problem? Lack of power. Courage to change the things I can within me, within my life, or within the world around me. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. Powerful prayer. Right? So, then we kind of go to page 71. The conclusion of the 4-step process. Now we are having the same experience as the first 100, or anybody who goes through this process the way they did will have exactly the same experience. Right? You hear people say, well, I wasn't really honest the first time I did the steps. Then you didn't do the steps. I didn't really do the steps. We know. Well, how do you know? Welcome back. I mean, like if you weren't honest, then you didn't do the steps. So let's cut the bullshit, okay? Like, you know what? You didn't do the steps. So quit telling people and you did it. That's another form of delusion, right? Because if you did this thing, then you have this relationship, then you'd have the answer, a way of life that answered all your problems. I've never met anybody who's ever gone through this, who's done it the way it's laid out by them, the same way they've done it, who's ever relapsed in the last 31 years, including myself. Now, how many people haven't done this and relapsed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how many people have done this the way it's laid out and maintained it and relapsed?
Oh, yeah. No. I didn't hear that last part there, bud.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. First 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Okay, we hope, Joe.
Well, you want me to read it?
No. Why confuse it now? Go ahead, Kimberly.
Where are we? We hope?
We hope.
We hope what?
Page 71.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was looking at in this book. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him.
So remember that? Page 60, being convinced. Being convinced. What do we mean by that? And just what do we do? Now they're saying, we hope you're convinced now. We've taken you through the whole thing. So from page 60 to 71, I understand exactly what they're talking about as to what the problem is, what the characteristic of that problem is, and what the solution is. All of us have that characteristic. So we hope, those of us who've done this, and since thousands, they talked about in the 4th edition, they talked about there is a solution. Thousands, we know thousands of men and women who were just as once hopeless as Bill, nearly all have recovered. Now they're saying, we hope, who? All those of us who've gone through this. If you got a sponsor that's working, they're hoping that when you go through this, you'll have the same experience. When Joe went through this, when Kimberly went through this, when a lot of you went through, you have the same collective experience of those that went before you. If you don't have that experience, then there's something that changed in the process. People change this process all the time. They think they find an easier, softer way of doing this, so it's not so confusing, then becomes a behavior modification exercise instead of a spiritual exercise to get you connected to source and power. That's the only purpose of this. Huh?
What steps would you say that most people change the most?
Other than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7?
Yeah. I was trying to say that in the 6 and 7.
We change it all.
Yeah.
Because if you look at step 1 the way you want, then step 2 will make sense the way you want. But if you look at it the way they say it, is like step 1 determines everything through the book. Because if you know that you're in a collision course with another relapse, regardless of what you do on your own resources, that's got your attention, right? But if you think you're going to stay sober based on your own experience, how well are you going to do?
You ain't going to do it.
But if you know you're going to relapse again 100%, that's what step 1 says. How many people go, whoa, 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 whoa? What are you talking about? But a lot of us disregard that information because we get taught different things. So back to where we are. We hope
you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him.
Who? God.
Yeah.
This power, source. If you've been through We Agnostics, you're okay with God. You'd be okay if we called it a peanut butter and jam sandwich. Because you know what we mean by that. It's the thing that keeps the two slices together, man. It's what holds it together. It's the peanut butter and jam, baby. You know what I mean? Like, even if we called it a peanut butter and jam sandwich, if you didn't go through We Agnostics, you'd be start arguing with about, well, I like only gluten free. All right.
Hey, yeah, and with no crust either. Right?
No crust. Like, we'd get into the argument. Here, we go back to the basis: God, power, source, creative, intelligent. What we call it secondary. To save time, they call it God now because we understand it as source. Right? And in their resource of strength that we get access to power. Right? Okay.
If you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning.
What are your grosser handicaps here?
4.
Fear, resentment.
So you see the theme here? Fear, resentment, harms, and conduct. Is it not? These are the things that have been cutting us off. These are the things that are eating our lunch. So now, let's go over it. Now we're going to have fun. Page 75. This is just to get our brain working along these lines because we're going to see what it actually says in 6 and 7, not what people says it is. We're going to look at both of them. So, returning home.
Returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. Taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? If we can answer to our satisfaction...
There's that word again, if.
If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable.
So you notice that now let's do step 6. Most of the steps say action and more action. This step doesn't have an action before it. All the action steps have action before it. Now this requires more action. This requires more action. Right? There's certain action steps. Now they're saying, let's look at step 6. We're going to look at it. Right? And we're going to... Now, here's you got to really keep an open mind because I know a lot of you are going to start... They just say work on step 6 or look at it. Looking at something and working on something, is it the same thing? No, it's not the same thing. To look at something and work at something. I go to job sites and I look at the job. I don't start working on it. I look at the job, see what it entails. I'm going to look. I'm just having a look here, okay? Then we look at step 6. And then let's see.
Are we now ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable?
So let's back up. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. So the key to this whole thing is...
Willingness.
Willingness. You're muted, Joe. Willingness, right? That's the key element of what? Are we now...
Have God removed from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable?
Question mark. What are all these things that we had admitted are objectionable? Write down what you're thinking right now. Write down what your brain tells you. What are all these things that are not what other people taught you? Right?
You can write it in the chat.
You're just going to look at what it says. All these things we admit are objectionable. We just went over it in great detail. What are all these things we admitted are objectionable?
Resentment, fear, sex, conduct.
How many people would agree that's what it's saying?
Well, now a lot of people are saying about what I think about myself, all my things in my four, Tony. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay, all these things are objectionable, right? So we see certain things that most of them will subside, right, in our five. But there's some things, all these things are objectionable, all these resentment, fears, and harms, and conduct. We see these are the things that are killing us, that keeps us disconnected from source. We don't see nothing beneficial. Anybody see anything beneficial in their four that they wanted to bring forward in their future?
No.
So we see this is what self-created, this havoc that I'm trying to get away from. We see the 4 steps, not what I used to be like. It is what I'm like on a non-spiritual basis directed by self. This is me. This is the big chunks of truth about myself, how I operate. This is how I respond to life. This is how I treat people. This is what I'll do to you if you do this to me. This is how I respond to pressure. This is how I respond to fear. This is how I conduct myself given these situations and these relationships. Me. I swallowed that just some big chunks of truth about myself. Right? So, can he now take them all? Everyone. Take what? Take what? Have them all.
You want her to read?
Yeah, all these things that are deep-rooted, all these resentments, these fears, these harms, this conduct, all these things that are causing my demise, right? That they talked about in the 4-step here on page 64. They talked about here, right? They talked about on page 64, they talked about here some big chunk of fact-finding, fact-facing process as an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged goods or unsalvageable goods to get rid of them promptly without regret. So when I'm harboring all these feelings and these ideas and past hurts and future fears, I see what I'm doing is I'm kind of ruining my own life based on my inability to shake that stuff. Does that kind of make sense?
And it's really hard for you to know what the stock and trade is because of these forms of delusion. Delusion, I put it up in the thing, it's a form of mental disorder, right? You're unable to see the truth about the stock and trade. This design, what we've just gone through, is a demonstration to say, hey, look at what you've looked like unsupervised for quite some time. And now we're giving you a formula where you're no longer unsupervised. But you've got to learn about the stock and trade, the things you continue to carry, the failures, the flaws in our makeup, right? And this is taking I've digested the grocer and handicaps about who? About me. I finally learned about the stock and trade that I've been carrying around and affecting everybody who's ever come into contact with me, right? Does that make sense?
And they're still determining my story, right? So on page 67, what Kimberly read earlier, it says, I see how these things are determining my outcome and how they're still robbing me of what's happening in today. My attachment to these people, places, and things. How they're still determining my existence, right? They talk about that here, right? How they set the ball. So I have a good indication now that I'm permitting these things, but I still can't shake them. But that's not what they're asking. Am I willing to have God take them all? All of them. All these resentments, all these harms, all these things. That's the first question, right?
Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. You know what?
Yeah.
There's nothing beneficial about my past. It's like moving from one house to another, right? But the house I was living at, all the furniture has been pissed on all over the place. It's infested with bugs. And I'm looking at it going, is there anything I want to bring to my new place here? Well, I'm kind of attached to this bed. And everybody look at it and say, oh my God, right? Well, it was a gift from somebody, right? It's kind of like, and you want to bring this to your new house. Oh, are you willing to get rid? Yes. You know what? If I could have all new furniture, I'd be okay with that. That's what it's kind of asking, right? Anybody? Am I willing to have a whole new apartment here? Is there anything beneficial from my old apartment that I want to bring with me? Nothing. Nothing. Right? Okay.
If we still cling to something, we will not let go. We ask God to help us be willing.
Whoa. If we still cling to something, we will not let go. What would we be still clinging to? Anybody got some injustices here? Anybody got some old pain, old angst? What these people done to me? Look what happened to me. The story. Anybody still stuck to a story? My story. If I get rid of the story, then what will become of me? I'm this way because of these things. No, I'm this way because I keep dragging these things with me. I'm this way because I haven't found a way to be free of these things. I'm this way because it narrates my story, justifies who I am and what I am and why I am the way I am. Well, okay, so it's saying here, and where you're really going to discover step 6 is more as life goes on. So what does that kind of mean? Well, some of the things I still hang on to, I don't know I'm hanging on to them until they represent themselves. That's why we're looking at it. And that's why it asks, am I willing to get rid of all these things? If we still cling to something we will not let go of, we ask God to help us be willing. That means these resentments toward mom, dad, brother, sister, the neighbor. Yeah, you know what? I still kind of, anybody ever, how spiritual are, go to a family reunion. What that looks like is anybody ever tell people how much they forgive them? How many people has told people here how much they forgive them? More than once.
Oh, yeah. Reminding them.
Anybody remind somebody how you've forgiven them? Come on, nobody here? Nobody's going, look how good I am. I've forgiven you that time. And you can't forgive me this time. Look, I forgive you this time, that time.
Remember what I did for you? You remember all those things? Hey, it wasn't that bad what I did to you, but you remember what you did to me, and you keep bringing it up every time you show up? Now, there you go. A bunch of people going, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
yes,
that
we all do it.
In essence, that's step 6. It represents itself when you least expect it. And when I'm spiritually right, it's nowhere to be found. And when I spiritually becoming depleted again, it starts showing up in different times. Like one time I was with my dad. He was dying of cancer, and it's kind of like when I'm spiritually fit, I never thought of the pain and agony and all the stuff he caused me, and it wouldn't even come to mind. I enjoy our relationship. When I become spiritually depleted, that underlying thing that I was still attached to, some form of emotional, a defect. A defect means not the proper, it's not the way it's meant to be intended. That's something that comes through an assembly line, and as it comes through the assembly line, it's defective. It's not operating correctly. It's like having a defective tire on your car. It'll affect how the other 3 tires work. It's defective, right? And the more you try to drive, the worse it gets. You need to replace the tire. Right? Defective means a situation that becomes in the present that's attached to in the past, determining what's happening today. So I'm not really responding today. I'm still dealing with something, with this person, place, or thing that has to do with my past. And I don't really see it all the time. I only see it every now and then.
And another thing is, it's not you got to remember, guys, and this is the time that the book only talks about part is in 8 and 9. I've done my part to set matters straight. In year 4, it's not your part, because if there's someone else's part, you're still carrying that resentment towards them. That's where that comes from. That's why when you go over there, you've got no freedom from the dilemma that was either caused by you or and you can't really be at peace with that. And when that stuff comes up, because you're still focused on their part and what they did, you can't know freedom. You can't forgive. So remember what it says on the 4 and 67. Where were we to blame? Where were our faults? The list was ours, not the other man's. Where was I to blame? We take ownership of these things. You get these freedoms within ourselves, and that's why if I'm unable to let go of these deep things, right, I have to ask to be willing. Why? Because I'll create the same or worse outcome as if before. There's no peace from it, right?
So defect is something that now it's moved from a resentment into a defect, right?
Yeah.
So once you've dealt with the resentment, you looked at it and you still carry it, it's no longer resentment. After a period of time, it becomes a defect. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but after a while, it stops becoming post-traumatic stress disorder. You no longer have that diagnosis. It becomes a personality disorder. It starts determining your personality, right? In the beginning, when it was post-traumatic stress disorder, I was trying to treat the underlying causes to these things. Some of it was so deep that I was unable to shake it. It started formulating my personality. So now I have a personality, a stress disorder, right? That I know when it comes. So that's kind of like this stuff. After a while, it starts determining your personality. It becomes distorted. Your personality becomes distorted. What it kind of looks like is it took probably, I worked at Trias 6 years before my view on the police changed. My own view. When I see them in the rear view mirror, this is sober. Or I see them around, I get anxiety. I'd sit up like I had something that, I don't know why, it created a defect in my character, and it started determining my moment. There's nothing happening, but my characteristics started to change. My attitude and my demeanor started to change. It's a defect. It's an idea that I hung on to that's deep-seated and grounded in something in the past. And you could attach that idea to anything. So instead of, when it came up, not realizing it because I never got taught this as the defect, I got taught the defect of character was the selfishness and consideration and dishonesty. That's what I got taught, that I had to work on these things. But the defect is my attachment, this energy that came up in association with these police. Instead of praying about it, I fed the story, right? And so what happens, that story maintains. So I worked at Triage for a while, and this person went missing. And I was an emergency care worker. They wanted me to get in the car, volunteer, and go drive around the neighborhood to go look for these people, this person, to help them. It took everything I had to be able to do that. To get in a cop car from where I come from, and go look for this person, and finger them, like point them out so they can get help and to work toward their benefit, because they were having a psychotic breakdown. They were going to kill themselves if they didn't get the help. So I got in the car, I worked with these police, and then it started changing my position with the police when I seen them in the community and stuff like that. So 98% of the time now, I'm 100% A-okay. I don't even check. I even wave when I walk my dog now. It's 31 years sober now, but I wave. I'm not, because when something goes wrong in my neighborhood, or when something happened with my kid, who's the first person I would call if my kid went missing or whatever? So this is changing the perspective, changing the story, changing the idea to have a new relationship. So years later, it's become different. Does that kind of make sense? And some of these things you won't know until you be going along and you realize, wow, I'm still harboring this feeling toward this person, this place, this thing. This still gives me anxiety when I go into this situation. Or I'm having this conversation with my partner and I'm angry about them today. But why am I angry? Because this is something that happened back then. It's something that's formulated my character. It's becoming defective to allowing me the experience that I'm looking for today. It's still determining my experience. So what happens is here, I need to acknowledge it, and then step 11 will show you how to diffuse it to have a different experience. Here they're just saying, willing to look at it, and these things that have warped your perception of life, maladjusted, full flight from reality, downright mental defectives, we're going to try to get you on the right side of crazy. Right? So quit kicking and screaming. You come along, just come along. You'll enjoy the ride. And when you're over on this side, you'll see, you've been trying to get over here for a while now. Okay. So
When ready, we say something like this. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad.
Stop. So when most people talk about 6 and 7, what do they talk about? All the bad shit. You ever notice that? This character defect, that character defect, that. So they started off with a new idea here. Acknowledge what the problem is, and then what we're going to do is redefine or recommit to our step 3. Is who do we make an alignment with or an agreement with that we're going to pursue this relationship? That was God, right? That God was going to do for me what I'm unable to do for myself. So it talks about, I'm willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Why do they say good and bad? Because it's the same coin. When you're thinking about how bad you are, who are you thinking about? Yeah, and when you're thinking about how good you are, who are you thinking about? You're still thinking about you, right? That's why we love working on ourselves. Oh, now I get to work on me. Nope, doesn't say that here anywhere, does it? Shit! Fooled again, because now it's, oh, now I get to work on me. Yay, what's our first obsession? Us. Remember, we got to watch out for this because self will delude ourselves into believing now it's time for you. Let me in, coach. Let me in, coach. Let me in, coach. And then we get in and now we start focusing on us. Well, we're the problem, right? So they're talking about here, have all of me good and bad. So there are 3 sides to a coin. What we need to do is get the coin upright. Right? The small side of the coin is the prayer, is our relationship with God. The other 2 sides of the coin is our relationship with ourselves. You see the challenge here, right?
Yeah, real thin area.
Yeah, so that little thing here is really, come on, let's get real here, is our idea or our relationship with God. The other side of the coin is, oh, how bad I am in life. The other side of the coin, man, I'm all that in a bag of chips. Shit, man. Can I share? All the promises are coming true. I'm so good. I helped 3 people today. Look, I got pictures. Fucking like, you know. I got this service position. I do this. I do that. Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, the neighbor was complaining about light beams shooting out of my apartment the other day. I prayed, you know, when I pray and meditate, I got to close the blinds, right?
Easy.
Okay.
It sounds like a lot of people do that. They go up to the podium and they talk about it. And this is what the good sounds. Hey, I got service positions. I do this. I got 5 sponsees. Look how many people I'm working with. Look what I do. Look what I do. Really, really feeding the delusion about self. Now fixing self when self was never able to fix self, and God's not left in the equation whatsoever. Oh, so, how'd you get that? Oh, no, I did the steps really well. Oh, God didn't open you up to a new experience to be free of all these things, and that you don't pray and meditate to Him. You don't do step 11. No, I do step 10. I continue to take my inventory and work on me even harder, right? And the delusion keeps getting fed, but we can't see, feel, or touch that.
So now it's saying, I've done my 4, I've done my 5, I've got a good understanding of these things. I don't want these things to be my future. The only thing that allows that not to be my future is, this is what I look like up to step 6. This is what I look like on a non-spiritual basis. Now I've been starting to have a different experience because I've been pursuing these spiritual principles. That didn't make no sense in the beginning, but now I'm starting to be convinced that when I apply them, I start getting relief from me. I have a new narrator. I'm able to match calamity with serenity. I'm able to master resentment. I'm able to find moments of peace when I practice these principles of being convinced that I'm creating, the narrator's creating this anxiety, this fear, this harm within inside of myself. So I'm creating a new story. So here I'm re-emphasizing step 3, which is my relationship with something greater than myself, right? My Creator.
My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows.
So, defective character that stands in the way of my usefulness. I still have all these defects of character to the degree they affect me and the people around me is directly proportionate to my relationship with a power greater than myself. When I'm in tune to that power, which they talk about in step 11, which we'll get in great detail, when I'm in tune with that, I don't suffer from self. There's no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Here they're saying refocus of not you working on you. This shortcoming defect is falling short of the desired mark or relationship or the experience that I'm looking for. These defects that interfere not only with me but the people around me. I have some certain defects even today. I know it's hard to believe, but I need to keep an eye on it, right? Because I have one of those defects that like to punish people if I feel injusted or slighted. I do, and it's subtle. It's so subtle that but I know about it. It's like when my one daughter, we went through something when she was 15, and a part of my background and heritage is now you need to pay penance for 5 or 6 years because you caused me harm. I'm going to bring it up every now and then. Right? And through sarcasm or barbed or revisit or shaming or guilt, I'm going to let you know what you did. You're going to remember what you did at certain times. When I feel that hurt, I'm going to let you know I feel hurt by saying that's then interfering with the relationship, right? So I knew that was a part of my character defect. So I said to my daughter, I said, you know what? You know I struggle with this every once in a while when I feel hurt, when I'm not feeling that great. I say these things, these sarcasms and these. Could you just kind of point out to me if I say something that causes you hurt or causes you a bit of shame and guilt in association with my pain that I still carry from that past thing? Could you say something to me and could we pray about it? And could you help me move toward the better idea of our relationship? Right? It's still there. But now I'm not involving her because when that energy comes to the surface, I pray, I redo the 3rd step prayer, I redo the 7th step prayer, but I look at the inventory and mostly I do step 11, right? This is the thing that I'll carry in step 11. So it says here, my usefulness to you and my fellows. Character defects, which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. In the moment. Remove this thing that I could override it to be of service to you and the people around me. Anybody have their brain talk to them or their energy or their brain where they don't want to go help, they don't want to be involved, they don't want to answer the phone, these defects that determine your relationships with people, places, and things, your judgment, the narrator, anybody have those things? And when those things are present, how useful are you to people, to God and the people around you? You're not. Anybody have those things? I get them every once in a while. Not feeling good the last couple of days. Forget the big book. Forget this. Whoa. Wait a minute. What's going on? Oh, I got some fear, some this, right? These fears are coming up, and they're tweaking my fight or flight. The defect is now attached itself to it, right? The narrator is getting back to, I don't care, nothing's going to hurt me, I don't need nothing or nobody. Whoa. So back to, hey, Joe, how you doing, man? Talk to Joe for a little while. My sponsor, he tells me about himself. I feel really good after that. But you see what I mean? That's the difference there, right? Is that I'm not doing this because I create these things because I have a defect, incorrect attachment, or situations that determine an undesired result. How many people have that? And how many people realize these things are not today's stuff? These things are the stuff I'm still carrying. And I can't see it because it's below. Like when I look at my screen here, I can't see the stuff that's behind the screen that's creating all this to make it happen. But if there's a glitch in it, it'll show up. Every once in a while there's a glitch. So I have to go back and run certain spiral or do certain things to take care of the glitch. But when it shows up, the defect in the hard drive, it only shows up in certain moments. It doesn't show up all the time, and that's kind of like us. When the computer's running good, it runs good. When the hard drive's not running good, there's something inside that's causing that malware or that non-functioning of it. Okay, you want to finish that?
Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen.
So, grant me what?
Strength.
Strength. Grant me power. What's our problem? Lack of power. What does step 11 say? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and power. Power. It's about not shifting my thinking back to me. I'm the problem. If I start working on me again, my life's going to demonstrate that, because I'll start becoming irritable, and the people around me will pay for my irritability with my inability to change me. And I'll start paying, because I'll be looking for a solution in people, places, and things, and conduct, and certain things to try to create a relief that causes more of the very same thing I'm trying to get away from. Being convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. But I do look for solutions in people, places, and things. How many people here? And they'll always fail me. Always. But when I seek this power, and then I seek the relationships, how will my life look? Then, if I'm all right with me, and my connection with the power greater than myself, how do my life and my relationships look around me?
Beautiful.
So now, which is really cool, is dependent on that side of the coin, right, determines my relationships with both sides of the coin. It's like when you put a coin into a slot, you know how you never notice you put it in sideways, you don't put it in flat, most of them, unless the laundry one, but it still goes through, right? And that's kind of like prayer, willingness. Apply this willingness, and it brings back great dividends. It creates the desired effect with people, places, things. So if I'm not, I think that's where that acceptance has some merits. When I'm disturbed, it means I'm spiritually depleted, or I'm depending on myself. But you need to look at the whole thing, right? Because when I'm spiritually right, is everything right around me? How many people could say, yeah, you know what? And if you're not right, how many things are right? So what does it say here? Want to do that prayer one more time?
Yeah.
We can do it together, actually, if we want to move on. When ready, we said something like this. We said something like this, right? For those who are ready to do the third, reconfirm our decision in step 3 by reiterating that God's going to do for us what we can't do for ourselves and create this change in the life that we're looking for. That's what we're saying here. We refocus our energy. It's actually God doing these things for me because I can't do them. It's not about me working on me. It's about me working on my relationship with God. It's not about me working on these defects or these things. All I need to do is be willing. Am I willing? Yes. To have God yes. Okay, when ready, we said something like this.
My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go from here to do your bidding. Amen.
What does it say right after that?
We have then completed step 7.
Step 7. Notice it didn't say step 6 and 7, because we looked at step 6. It's a looking at of something that's going to be tripping blocks for us in our future. We look at these things that we still hang on to, or they're still below the surface. And as we go along in 11 and 10, we'll see these things more clearly, right? And here in step 11, it reminds us the only thing that could save us from these fates or these defects is our relationship with something greater than ourselves. It really iterates where our focus is to be. You want to add anything to that, Joe? That was good. I really enjoyed today.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was beautiful. Step 6 is 6, 7, 11. That's got me sitting here today, and really, it's got me reacting the way to life. It's got me coming aware of certain things I made. One of these things that we're eating up was a little story. I'll make it quick. I had an amends that cropped up, and I was avoiding it. It was a guy that I really caused a lot of harm. I looked at him as if an enemy, and there were some things blocking me off. And it was eating my lunch for about almost a month. I ignored it, and it's cropping up, and it's coming up in my 11s, and I'm putting it off, and I'm not willing yet to have God remove this from me. And I keep dealing with it. But what happens throughout the day? it crops up, my demeanor changes, and I start reacting based off this thing that I'm still going about. So I kept seeing it. I voiced it with somebody else. I brought it right to the surface. I had to. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't evade. And 6-7, I'm now willing. What? To give me the strength to go out from here and do your work. And that's kind of where this is going, to the 8s and the 9s. I got to have that strength to face those things within myself that I'm in fear of. Fear was crippling me from going up to a guy who I humiliated. I wasn't a really good character to this individual. But it's funny because when I thought of him, guess who came up on my friends list on Facebook? He popped up. Guess who I added as a friend? Him. And then guess what happened? As a result of that, I left him a voice memo on his messenger. I said, hey, back in the day, I did some things that were unbecoming of a human being. I was suffering from a lot of things, alcoholism, a little bit of a mental disorder. If there's anything that I can do with you, brother, to correct that, let me know. And I hope you are living one of the best lives that you could ever be living. And if you want to get in touch with me, I gave him my number. But since doing that I'm not carrying that anymore. And thank you, God, for giving me the strength to go out here and do your bidding. I had to fit myself to be of service to that gentleman because I knew what was going on. And plus, like, what I caused him, who knows? It's all about him getting the relief from it, if he wants it or not. But I had to make that demonstration.
Sorry, did you say a little bit of a mental disorder? Sorry. So, here's a good exercise this week. Read 8, 9, 10, 11 if you got a chance. Read right through till page 88, and we're going to cover in great detail next week. Take a piece of paper like this and write down some of the things if you're still hanging on to anything with people, places, and things. Doesn't mean you're going to deal with them, but you're going to acknowledge that you're still carrying them. Right? And those are the things you'll bring to your Creator, bring to God. Right? To be willing to have the detachment from these things. Write down the story that you're still attached to. Not the whole thing. Am I still attached to the story? Am I still attached to this person, place, or thing? Am I still carrying something that I really still can't get rid of? Is there still something eating my lunch that I've looked at it and I still can't shake? And it's okay to have that. That's what step 6 is all about. Yes, I still have these things, but I'm willing to bring them to God. I'm willing to be willing. That's what step 6 is about. And do step 7 anytime. Kimberly?
Hi. 7th tradition. The 7th tradition is self-supporting through our own contributions. These contributions help cover the regular group's expenses, but this Big Book workshop actually meets in person here in Vancouver multiple times throughout the week, and we do have obligations to pay our rent. Even though we are not using the space, we want to be able to go back to that space after this is over, as well as the main group does pay contributions towards the 4 levels of AA service. So if anyone is able to, in these times, donate to our 7th tradition, it does help cover our expenses and ensures the longevity of this Big Book workshop when and if we're allowed out of our homes. Also, if you're unable to give a donation to us through our link for whichever reason, consider making a donation to your local area, your local intergroup, or to GSO New York directly. Keep in mind that 99% of in-person meetings are not happening right now, so the coffers are not getting donations. AA is still functioning 100%. There's phone lines being answered. There's Wi-Fi bills to be paid, and there's literature to be mailed. So AA is functioning as always from different places, but rent needs to be paid. So if you can't donate to us, we encourage you to donate to your local area intergroup or to GSO directly. And they've made it really, really simple to do. It's on the first page of all of their websites. So all you got to do is Google it.
And thank you for having us in your homes and being a part of this. We're really enjoying it. If you get a lot out of it, please let us know if we're being of service and help. That's awesome. And we'll close with the 3rd step prayer. For those that wish, what makes this all possible, and what's the first requirement in making it happen? God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Live long and prosperous. Till Thursday.
And Joe will put up his email and the YouTube link in the chat. So if you've missed any of our workshops, they are on Tony's YouTube channel. And if you do not have the worksheets and it maybe is your first time and you want to get caught up, Joe can email you the worksheets and you can watch and get caught up on the YouTube channel. For those who have nothing else to do, because